Yeah.
Okay. Well, from here on out, I will act as if we are in the interview. So,
Okay.
everyone, Songs of the Great Lakes followers, it's been a hot minute since our last interview, but I couldn't think of anyone more outstanding to bring aboard for our next interview than, uh, in my opinion, my favorite artist. Just an incredible man, an incredible talent, and I would love to introduce to you everybody today the one and only Tony Strublic.
Hi, everybody.
Tony, thank you so much for agreeing to come on here, and it was a great joy to meet you. What was it, 2 weeks ago or week and a half ago now? Was it?
Yeah. Yeah. Roughly about 2 weeks. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, we got to meet in Ludington. And speaking of that, how did before we get into the role, how did that go for you? The Ludington.
Well, I've been doing my art shows, my traveling art shows now 15 years. I've been going to various places, and this one was the best show in terms of sales I've ever had in 15 years, anywhere I've gone. So it was kind of unexpected that it reached that level, but I was very happy. Yeah, that was the best show, and this show has actually broken records for me before, but this one was just phenomenal. And the Ludington area, I love it. It's one of my favorite places to go every single year. And just with so much history with the car ferries, and that not only Ludington but Frankfurt, where the car ferries were major players from. There's so much history there, and so many people still remember the history, even though the Badger's the only one running anymore, and Frankfurt doesn't have anything up there anymore. But there's so much knowledge and so much history. People still remember it all.
Absolutely. Do you think that area, because freighters are so well known in the area, do you think that kind of contributed to just really not just I want to say sales, but just like overall interest? You think in that or?
Oh, yeah. And one thing I will mention too about the shows I go to is that all of my shows that I do are along water. So either a port city or a town that's tourist destination town for because it's on the water. Um, that definitely helps with what I have, because if I was doing a show, say in Central Michigan, I don't think the interest would be there. Everybody knows the Edmund Fitzgerald, but very few people would bring up an obscure freighter that they'd be looking for, if they weren't on the water thinking about it. That's one of the big things that helps me, is being on the water.
Absolutely. I can understand that and see that. And that's, um, I want more of the, I guess, inland people to know about this history. And that's why I wanted to bring you on is like, hey, we all know we love the Fitz. That's a great gateway ship into it. Look at all these other ones. And here's Tony bringing them to life for us in incredible artwork. I love that. I want to keep bringing that part of Michigan's history to people's just overall knowledge and stuff. I say this all the time. There's more to Michigan than cherries and wine and campfires and rah rah
Yeah,
on the beach. There's so much more to that. It ain't wrong. It just there's more to it, more to Michigan than just that.
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Well, sweet. Would you mind? So tell us. So everybody, again, Tony's an amazing artist. What kind of led to that? Was it you immediately knew you wanted to start doing maritime work, or was it kind of like, oh, I did some other kinds of stuff, and then it eventually led into that? Like, how did you? What got you into this, if you don't mind telling?
Well, when I was a kid, and this happens with most kids that I see that come into the booth looking for this particular ship, and it was the Titanic. And when I was, 2, 3 years old, somehow 4 years old, somehow I fell in love with it. And I fell in love with shipwrecks. And I grew up in central Wisconsin, a little town called Watoma, which is, for those of you that know Wisconsin at all, it's about 40 minutes west of Oshkosh, which is south of Green Bay. And so I didn't grow up on the water. I didn't grow up, sailing or anything like that. I just somehow fell in love with the Titanic. It fascinated me, and it got me interested in not only shipwrecks, but then ships as well. And I was always doodling as a kid, always working on something. In fact, we would go out to eat at restaurants. My brother and my parents, we would go out to eat, and the placemats that they put your food on. I would have to turn it over, and my mom would give me a pen or a pencil, and I would start drawing something. And most often it was a ship. It was the Titanic or something like that. Um, I never really sought out to be an artist. I guess I always just enjoyed to do it, and um, I just grew to love more than just the Titanic. Growing up in Wisconsin, you learn about Great Lakes shipping, and the Edmund Fitzgerald, of course, was a shipwreck, and so that was kind of transitioning into that's the Edmund Fitzgerald helped me get into Great Lakes ships and shipwrecks, and of course the song "Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald." My parents have and still have. They have in the "Summertime Dream" album, which the "Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald" came out on, and I played that over and over and over. I probably wore a good track into that thing because I would listen to it all the time. I can still see the Reprise record logo with the paddle wheel ship that they put on there. And I can still see it. And in fact, my folks found it in their basement. We were going through some things and they found it. I said, "Don't get rid of that. Keep that. Make sure you have it." Because that was back, it was a 76 Summertime Dream album. I said, "Don't get rid of it. I want it." So, um, but getting back to the art part of it, art was always something that was there for me, through everything else I did. I was in music. I was originally going to go into music. I was going to go into, I wanted to be a band instructor. And I was really into music. I played the trombone back when I was in middle school, high school. So I was ready to go into that. And another thing that people probably don't know about me is that I'm a bowler too. I would consider myself a very good bowler. Um, so that's another thing that I had. And I actually went into bowling as a career, like bowling center, learning how to run a bowling center. And so that took me away from art for a little while. But it was always still in the back of my mind. Um, and once I had graduated college, I'm in Marinette, Wisconsin, so north of Green Bay by about an hour. I'm right across from Menominee, Michigan, which is another, I would say about 10,000 people there, and we have about 10 or 11 here. That's where I started my career in bowling at a 16 lane bowling center. And at one point, I suddenly decided to do something with art again. And I had gotten away from it for a while. I originally started out not only drawing, but I started painting. I did acrylic paintings when the Titanic movie came out in '97, and I was doing acrylic paintings. But then I eventually moved on from it. I just kind of, not only my career starting, but with what I was doing, I saw so many artists doing that I kind of, I don't want to say got bored with it, but kind of just lost my interest because there were so many people doing that. And I literally looked at what should I do? I didn't really want to paint. Um, and I looked at, I literally looked online. I did a Google search for pencil drawings of ships, and I didn't find much of it. I found very little of it. What I did find was just basically, um, I don't want to say rudimentary drawings, but not very, very detailed drawings, especially with the scenes around them, like your clouds, your skies, your water, things like that. I didn't see a lot of it. So I thought this might be something that I could look at. And so I started working on that. I started focusing strictly on the drawing, no more painting. Uh, and I really got into the drawing part of it. And that was about 2007 or eight, I want to say. I actually I went up to all the way up to Sault Ste. Marie with a few of my drawings, and there's a gallery up there, and I wanted to get an opinion. And they thought my work was good. I was actually very happy to hear that for somebody that hadn't really been judged on my work before, and they thought it was pretty good. And they said that if I ever got enough pieces, that they would consider doing a show with me. I'm like, well, that was pretty cool to hear, as an artist that hadn't really done anything yet. So I decided to start focusing on that, and in the meantime too, I'm still, working in the bowling alleys. I had moved on from the one in Menominee to the one in Peshtigo, which is I was about 5, 6 miles south of Marinette. And so while I'm doing all that, I'm starting to draw. I'm starting to work on real drawings, um, which took me a few years to get some that I thought were for the way I do things now, um, a little more on par with something that I thought I could sell. So that kind of led into where I am now with doing all the shows, and it's grown so much more than I ever dreamed, I guess. I mean, I'm right now I'm sitting in my studio talking to you, where I never ever expected to have my own studio. I always thought it was a hobby, something I would do out of the house. Um, but it got to the point where I felt that okay, it's time to, um, if I'm going to do this, it's time to get into a building, my own building. And I did. My first studio was in Marinette. I ended up having to move. The building was going to be uh, replaced with a parking lot. The owner of the property wanted to make a parking lot, so I had no choice but to find a new place. And I found a place out in Peshtigo, and it's been wonderful. It's a much bigger, much better place, um, and I'm just very happy with that. And continuing, not only the artwork part, but bowling as well, and mixing the two together. I'm pretty much kitty corner from the lanes, so I'm right nearby. If anything needs to be fixed, or so I can go over there and work on it. But yes, I mean, I guess in a nutshell, that's how this, from my beginnings up to now, how this has all come about.
From crayons doodling on the restaurant to
Yeah,
pens and then bowling and then
yeah,
Edmund Fitzgerald. I mean, hey, it just makes sense.
yeah. There's so much. I mean, I guess I could kind of consider myself a jack of all trades, master of none. I mean, if you can say that,
Yeah,
that old saying. I'm very diversified. That's a really good word for it. I'm very diversified when it comes to
your
what
Swiss
I'm
Army
doing.
knife. There you go. You got all
Yeah,
these
I guess
different.
so.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly.
It sounds like you and I have very similar inspirations. Same for me was the Fitz going up to Whitefish Point and the museum and learning that whole world. I think I was like 10 or 12. Um,
Hmm.
and when that world got introduced to me, and I'm like, wait, what? Because like you, I'd only known of the Titanic and out in
Yeah,
the Atlantic. But then I'm like, wait, it's almost like yeah, you're surrounded by these Great Lakes. You'd think,
yeah.
of course, there's been 1 or 2 or more shipwrecks, and the Fitzgerald was just incredible. Uh,
Mhm.
let's talk a bit about very specifically, because the level of detail that you put into your drawings clearly comes from a very big passion, a very big, um, love for this. I think what about the fits drew you in, for you because everybody has their different kinda, "Oh, well, this part of it or this part of it or that part." Like, what
Mhm.
about the fits then? We'll start there. Really made you fall in love with this and then take it from there.
That's a very good question. To be quite honest, I'm not really sure. I mean, it was just something about it just lured me in. I don't know if it was the story more than the ship itself, because it's such a great mystery. I don't know if that's why. Um, Obviously, living in the Great Lakes region, I think that's part of it too, because I have kids that come into my booth at art shows and point at it and know what it is. So it's not strictly something that, um, maybe people outside of our region would know as much. And John Bacon's book has helped a tremendous amount with people now learning about the Emma Fitzgerald. But it's tough to say what really attracted me to it. And again, I go back to shipwrecks, and I think, with the Titanic being a shipwreck, the Edmund Fitzgerald is shipwreck, and I think just the, the it's hard to describe. Really. Um, I think just the mystery of what happened, maybe, I think that's part of it. But um, and just being fascinated with ships in general. I think that those two things kind of had a big factor into why I fell in love with it. And obviously you learn that the Edmund Fitzgerald is not the only ship in the Great Lakes. I mean, there's thousands of other ships out there, and ships that never became shipwrecks and aren't going to become shipwrecks. And um, I think it's just something that just fascinates you to the point where, it is something very passionate that you just enjoy, more than the actual event itself. Um, like going to Sault Ste. Marie, seeing the boats there, and doing shows along the St. Clair River where they're going right by you. There's just something about these massive ships that move through the water carrying all this cargo, and you just can't believe that they do this day in and day out. I think maybe that's part of it too.
Yeah. No, absolutely. There's definitely a mystery, if you want to say, around it. I think that draws people in because obviously we don't know what happened, but not just the fits, but how many Great Lakes freighters, if off the top of your head, have you drawn now, if you could put a number?
Well, I went through my website probably a few months ago, and I have to going through it and trying to remove some older images, things like that. But I think I'm around just in Great Lake ships I would say over 350. And that's not even scratching the surface. When you think of the thousands of ships that have been in the Great Lakes, 350 is it's less than 1%. I mean, even less than that of what's out there. I mean, I really have an unlimited number of things that I can draw, and that's not just Great Lakes ships too. I do ocean liners as well, and think about how many of those there have been over the years and the centuries. There's such a vast amount that I'll never be able to accomplish all of them. But you know, um, but I think that's closer to the number that I've done. Um, I think overall probably around 450 to 500 drawings altogether. So
Wow. What
it's a lot.
I mean, there's no shortage of material to work with. That much is clear. I don't think in your
Yeah.
lifetime you'll ever run out of material to work with.
No.
What
No.
what kind of makes you decide, okay, I just finished this project. What's your thought process that leads into I want to do this? Or like what kind of helps you decide kind of what for your projects?
Um. Well, the majority of the time, because when I'm doing my shows, when I go to a certain area, I always like to carry. Um, I like to carry local historic type things, either lighthouses or freighters or ships that visit more often. So, a particular area like Ludington's a really great example of that. Um, I'll work on not just the Badger, but I work on a lot of the old car ferries that used to come to that area. Um, there's so many that are out there, that will never probably get a chance to finish and draw. But yeah, there's so many.
Do you obviously gotta when you go into to okay, I've decided on the ship I want to do. Do you do how much historical looking into do you do like the background of the ship before we even get to pencil and paper? Like do you do any of that, like looking into stuff like that for it or
Well, the majority of the time, I usually get an idea in my head what I want the ship to look like when I'm going to draw it, and it's kind of after that, especially if it's one I haven't drawn before, then I'll start researching it. Um, you know, Sometimes it'll just kind of happen when I see something that I'd like to do. Then I'll look into that a little bit more and make sure I can find photographs of it. But most of the time, that's how it happens. Is the idea comes out in my head, and then I'll research on the internet or out of books and find photographs that I need.
have you ever come across any like, oh wow, this was totally interesting about this wreck or
Mm.
something you didn't I'm sure you come across stuff like that all the time. What's
Oh,
some
sure.
some
Yeah.
interesting things?
Um, well, it's hard to really say, to pinpoint one, but it seems like every time that I work on something, I learn something new about it, even though I may have drawn it before. it's hard to pinpoint something that just stood out and went, "Oh, wow." I didn't know that. Um, but even now, drawing the Edmund Fitzgerald as many times as I have, I'll come across something and have a revelation and go, "Oh, so that's what that is. That's what that looks like." Um, I think it's more often than not just the visual part of it where, I see something that stands out more than I noticed before, or come across a photograph that helps me identify something different that I didn't know, that was always kind of a blurry thing you know, that I put in there with some artistic license. But now, oh, I can finally draw that because now I know what it is, a specific vent or something like that. Um, that kind of stands out more.
Absolutely. You had mentioned at Ludington, what was it? You did a 50th anniversary drawing of the Fitz, was that? And you sent it to
Yeah.
brother Rick. What did he say about all that?
Yeah. Oh, he loved it. I always share, with Rick, the new Fitzgerald things that I do, because he's one of the most well-known Fitzgerald historians out there. Um, but yeah, he's always fascinated with what I come up with. I think, and that's cool. I mean, getting back to like getting into this, knowing people like Rick Mixter and Bruce Lynn and other people that are escaping me right now,
Brandon?
Fred
Right,
Stonehouse,
Stonehouse, yep.
uh, people that I always just looked at their books and read their books and enjoyed documentaries they made, but now actually knowing them and sharing my artwork with them and being able to talk to them about things like the Fitzgerald, it's pretty fascinating from a kid that grew up in central Wisconsin. I think, you know, um, I never expected that I'd be, communicating with people like that. And it's, I mean, Rick Victor's been to the Edmund Fitzgerald, he's been to the wreck and, seen things that people that we will never know about. There's stuff that he saw that no one will ever see other than him. And I think that's fascinating.
Have they, all these people, have they, when you show them like a new piece of artwork or they know what you do, have they ever given you oh, I can see that now. I can see it because it's pen to paper or pencil to paper, and they can
Mhm.
see it. Like, what's some input? I guess that's what I want to say. What these some of these have they given you some good input? How's that?
Um, you know, Honestly, not really. I haven't gotten a lot of that. It's more, just looking it over. I think they're maybe studying it,
Yeah.
but not offering any criticism or critique. I mean, um, I guess I don't criticize their um, how they're doing their history. They're reporting their history, so I don't know if that's a part of it that they're not going to critique what I'm doing. But yeah, as far as that goes, I really haven't had that before. At least not from the people like that. I always get at art shows. I always get the rivet counters that will notice something and say, "Oh, you didn't put this here," or this isn't quite right, or this. Okay, that's fine. You kind of have to let that you have to let that stuff go a little bit because it is a drawing. It's not going to be. It's not a 100% maybe accurate representation of something. But that gets back to you know, the research part of it, finding photographs and things like that. They're not always the clearest.
Right.
So sometimes, something may not look right, but but that's probably the most criticism I get is just from people in the booth, but um, not from the historian part of it. No.
Well, it sounds like you get, and that's what I was thinking. I was hoping, like, it sounds like you get some good love, some good input from these people, and that's always appreciated, and which makes me think, like, what's some of the wildest things people have said in your booth? Like, oh, I could do that. Oh, really? You could do
I've
that?
heard that. Yeah, I've heard that. One of my favorites. I going back This is back in an art show back in Sheboygan, Wisconsin. This is going back a few years, and I had a guy come in and he told me he says that the Edmund Fitzgerald had been lengthened 300 feet before it went down. And I said, "Sir, I'm really sorry, but that's not right. I mean, the Fitz was never lengthened there were other ships that resembled the Fitzgerald, but they first of all were never lengthened 300 feet. But he insisted. He says you should learn the history. You should learn the history. And he says I have a book that says this. Well, my response was, in the nicest way I could possibly say, go get your book. I'd love to see where it says that the Fitz was lengthened 300 feet. You know, that was one of my favorites. It ended with a very casual and a very nice "Have a good day, sir." It was, you also have to remember that you are in the customer service business, and no matter how crazy what you hear might be, you have to just go, oh, really? Okay. Unless it's something like that. Then it's like, no, I had another gentleman years ago too that told me the Edmund Fitzgerald was a self-unloader. And I said, no, it's not. No, it's not. And he looked at my picture and he says, well, that's not right. That's not right. There's a self-unloader on there. It was again, have a good day, sir, basically.
Wow.
So I've heard some pretty crazy things. Over the years. It's hard to remember all of them, but those few kind of stick out in my mind. So
I'm sure you just take them, let them roll off of you, but, like, if it's, like,
you
an
have to.
obvious, like, "Well, hold up now."
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. There are times, I had somebody come in my booth with their kid, and he proceeded to say absolutely everything wrong about the Edmund Fitzgerald that you can possibly think of. He even had it going down in Lake Michigan, and I didn't even decide to say anything. I'm like, okay, I don't have time to correct this person of all the things that are wrong with what he's telling his child. And I mean, it was crazy how what he was telling them. But so those are the ones, again, you just have to go, oh, okay, and just hope that they don't try to argue with you, because I have had a few people that argued, like the gentleman with the 300-foot thing there. It was close to being an argument, and I had another person in my booth, when they left, they're just like, what was that guy's problem? I said, I don't know. You just kind of have to brush it off, and you remember it, and you laugh about it now, but boy, that guy was so passionate about. He knew that was what it was. So yeah, I've heard some pretty wild things, and you hope they don't escalate. It's a piece of art. It's not meant to be, um, you know, a, a photograph. It's a piece of art. And I think people sometimes lose that fact. But yeah, I've heard some crazy stuff over the years. Yeah,
With well, like your Anderson right here, I think maybe it comes out so lifelike looking that maybe they think this is like historic, historic,
yeah.
like diagram blueprint level. I'm
I mean, I try to get them as accurate as I possibly can, and there are features, and sometimes you cannot find the evidence enough to make it completely accurate. But one thing I think, that going back to the drawings, when I researched how to, wanting to do these drawings, going back to that, I think that my goal was to finish the entire scene around a picture. So not just the ship, but the sky and the clouds in the sky, water that's sailing through, where a lot of other artists that I saw weren't doing that. And I'm wondering if sometimes that maybe makes people believe that they are something they're not. They're not photographs. And I mean, there are many times, it happens at every show, where people come in and ask me where I got the photos, or did I take these photos, or who took these. And I have to tell them these are actually pencil drawings that I do. And the first reaction generally is that they get closer to one and they go, really? And they look at it much closer. So I think sometimes there is a confusion with people, even though I have signage and decorations that indicate that they're pencil drawings. Um, they often end up still explaining what they are. So, and that's fine. I mean, it's the biggest compliment in the world to me if somebody will think that it's a photograph. Um, I think that's the highest compliment I can get. And from where I started to now, I think that's just amazing to get that compliment. So, I don't think of it as somebody being wrong about it. I think of it a compliment more than anything else.
oh yeah. Yeah, that's incredible. Everybody's got their 2 cents to,
Oh
input.
yeah.
That's incredible. Yeah, I mean, we could spend the next hour talking about the fun of humanity and their
Yeah.
opinions and everything. Um,
Hmm.
Perfect. I think so. Walk so now let's get to a real big one. So walk us through a process now where we got the pencil in our hand and we got the vision how we wanted to do this. Kind of walk us through how does this go? It will describe maybe the tools you use or the angles, anything that you want to share that
Well,
for how does this start for you? How do you begin doing this?
I'll tell you too. I'm actually sitting at my studio table right now. And I can move this here and I'll show you. This is kind of you can see the pencils and the different tools that I have sitting here. Also my computer that I think I can find, and my monitor and my computer.
Wow.
Um, so I have all these things, and I also have, where I do a lot of my sharpening, shading. I have my graphite powder that I use. Um, and I also have a fairly extensive book collection. I don't know if I can get that in there either, but there's where other drawings are that are in progress.
Oh, wow.
And then here's where I have my bookcase. I'm gonna show that off too. You can see my ribbons on the
Look
wall
at all
there.
those ribbons.
I
That's
believe you can.
incredible.
Yeah. So so that's kind of that's where I'm at right now. That's where I'm sitting. But the process of a drawing. So I get an idea. Again, I get an idea in my head. First of all, what I want to draw, and second of all, what type of angle that I want it to be down on my board. And I do use inspiration sometimes from photographs on angles, but a lot of time I like to produce something that from an angle that you don't see a lot of. And from freighter a point of view of a freighter, there's so many photos that are taken from shore. So they're close by, they're close to shore. I like to try to place them out on the water, somewhere way out in the lake.
As if we were
And
like a
that'll
drone
probably
looking at it maybe or something, or
possibly like, or if you're in a small boat and you happen to look up at the freighter, so that's kind of what I like to do. So that idea gets in my head, and then I get out a piece of Canson. I use Canson illustration board. It's a Bristol plate board, and it's very very smooth. I've experimented with other ones, and I think that this one just works best for what I do. I have a bunch of different sizes that I pre-cut. So from 8 by 10 up to 20 by 30s. I have many sizes in there. I generally stay, unless it's a commission, I generally stay smaller just because of the room I have at booths to display my artwork. And I get the board out and I start kind of looking at it and seeing the idea in my head if I can see it down on the board. And that's when I start looking for the photographs. So for reference. So I'll kind of draw like the bow stem and maybe where the stern's going to be, just so I kind of have an idea where I want it to be. So I look at photographs and then many angles as I can find of a particular boat, above, from the side, in the front, the back, anything that'll give me angles and clear enough images of things. So that's when I start basically using a harder lead. Generally, I use a 2H now. I used to use a 6H, but that actually puts more of a pressure crease into the board when I'm drawing. So if I erase it, I erase the pencil out, but the line is still there. So then when I shade later on, you can see that. So started using a softer pencil to start laying out my drawings just because of that. That way, if I erase it, if I have to change something, then that extra line isn't there. So I lay out the initial form of the ship. I'll put the raised forecastle up there. The after cabins, and a lot of this. And again, this is all done through my eye. I don't grid anything off, so I don't use grids for any of this. So that's how I basically just see the image in my head and put it down on the board. So I seem to have a very good eye for that, um, to see perspective and distance and up close and uh, So that's how it basically starts. So once I have the ship in there enough, then I'll move into the sky. So because the sky is behind the ship, and it's impossible to do it once you have the ship drawn in and completed. Putting the sky in there is just gonna work. So I lay out that, and I use a chamois, so a piece of softer leather, and I use graphite powder, and it's very extremely fine powder, and it's actually like lubricating graphite, so you can lubricate bearings with this stuff. So what I get a little on there, and I shade in my background sky, and then I come back in and use erasers. So I'll either block out clouds with a real soft rubbery eraser, and I'll use ironically enough, the ends of the old, the pencils you could just put on the end, and like in school, I use the white soft rubber ones, and that's how I create the clouds, and then go back in with graphite again and kind of highlight some spots, and remove it again, and just kind of layer them up a little bit. Once the sky is completely done, that's when the detail of the ship gets put in. So generally work from one side to the other, just kind of, I think, how I feel that day. If I want to work on the bow first, or if I want to work on the stern first. But um, I like to work a certain angle so I don't end up smudging something that I've already worked on, because smudging is inevitable with pencil, with graphite. I mean, even my rulers that I use, they'll actually pick up graphite on the back, and if I'm sliding a pencil around or the ruler around, it can smudge what I've done. So I have to be very careful to keep those things clean too. But a lot of times I'll use a simple sheet of paper that I'll fold in half, that I'll put down on a board where I've worked on something, to cover that up so I can't disturb it. So that's when, like I said, the whole ship gets drawn in, and the last part of it is the water. Always do that last. Um, and it's a very similar process. I use graphite powder again with a chamois, and I shade that whole area in. And then that's where it gets a little bit different. I have a couple of soft bristle paintbrushes that I'll dab into the graphite powder, and I'll create some dark spots where I'm going to have the water, where the waves are going to be. So once I have that completed, then I go back in with the erasers, the cap erasers again, and I start cutting in wave tops, strokes, and then I remove, with that soft eraser, remove a little bit, so you getting that sunlight looking, shining down on there, and then I'll go back in with some more graphite and kind of, harden some edges a little bit, and then I use one of these mono zero erasers, the round ones most often. I'll take a knife and cut it to a super sharp point, and then I actually will put in small little wave strokes in certain areas, just to show, all the tiny little waves that are in all these big waves. When you look at that, you see little waves inside the big ones. So once that is finished and I'm satisfied, sometimes I go back and look at something and say, okay, I need to adjust this on the boat a little bit, or I got to add this, or oh, this doesn't look quite right, so I'll go back and change some things. But then I put my signature on it, and then I use a workable fixative. It's a spray-on, a Krylon workable fixative. I'll spray the whole piece and let it set for a little bit. It doesn't take long. It doesn't take long to set up. But I will use a workable one just in case, after the fact, if I still see something that isn't quite right, I can still go back and I can work on that, and I can I can remove that. I have a different type of eraser um, that'll allow me to. It's a little bit tougher eraser that I can go back and I can remove spots like that, and then work on it again. But most often than not, usually when I put my signature on it, that means it's done. So that's really the process. And then once it's sprayed, I've set it up in my photography area, and I shoot a picture of it. I'll shoot probably 3, 4, 5 photos. Um, take the camera, hook it up to the computer, and then the image gets downloaded into the computer. And I don't use Photoshop. I know a lot of people ask me if I use Photoshop. I use something called Photoscape, and it's very similar. It's not to the extreme that Photoshop is, but it's similar, and it allows me to get. I do have to adjust the image when it goes into off the camera into the computer. It changes a little bit. So even though I have really good lighting setup and everything like that, it's still a little bit different. So I'll change and adjust things, and either contrast or things like that, just to bring it back up. Sharpen. Sometimes you lose some things. You have to sharpen it. So, but that's basically the process. And then I make prints from that. And I do all my own printmaking in my studio too. So I'm basically from the idea in my head, start to finish, from printing it off. And the originals they get framed, and they're all available for sale. I don't have anything. I only have one that I will never sell, and it is when I met Dennis Hale, the sole survivor from the Daniel J. Morrell. When I met Dennis, we're going back now probably, oh God, good 10, 12 years ago, maybe longer. When I met him, he signed the glass on one of my drawings I did of the Morel. So I have that hanging up in my studio, and that's one I won't get rid of because it's got his signature on it. So that's about all I have for my collection. I don't really keep any of them, but I have kept that one. So that one meant a lot to me.
What did
So
he
that's
think when he
basically the
saw it?
process. He was impressed. He was, I mean, at that time, that drawing was done in 2010, 2011. So it's very early on for me. And I look at it now, and there's the detail in that is, and even the surroundings of it are much, much less than what I put out now. My style has evolved over the years, and I look back at that and I say, boy, I like to think I've come a long way. So here, in fact, I think I'll try to get it if it can. I don't know if you can see this or not, but let's see, where am I at? There it is, right there.
Oh, at the bottom
That's the
left there?
drawing.
Okay.
Yeah, in the bottom, yeah, the bottom left there is where his signature is. I think I got it. So,
I mean,
but yeah, so
that's
that's the one that I
incredible.
won't. Yeah, I won't get rid of that one. That one's definitely going to stay with me. So,
I love that whole process. That was what so does what shading so like say you got the sun, how does that affect how you want the shading to lay on the ship, like different uh, maybe time of day, or it usually is always the same kind of time of day? What would you say for that?
well,
And then what is your, I guess, least favorite, if you have a least favorite part of the process?
I think as far as the sun goes, that kind of happens as I'm working. So once I get the ship laid out, and there again, there's no detail in that yet. When I put the sky in behind me, that's kind of when I decide where the sun's going to be coming from. I like to show, the clouds, so the sun would be hitting them. I don't like to show them like in, like a late day, where you can't really make out the shapes. I like to show the clouds. I think that's one of the things that I'm kind of most proud of is the evolution of the sky that I put in there. Just when I started with basically like that drawing of the morel with nothing behind it, now I have, and I like to show more of a dramatic sky instead of just some puffy clouds in there. I like to show, maybe a thunderstorm in the distance, and, clouds, large clouds that are in there. I think it helps um, add character to the drawing. And I do all sorts of different scenes, but lately it's been more of putting the larger cumulonimbus clouds in the distance, and setting the ship among that. So, as far as what my least favorite thing to do, honestly, this is going to sound silly, but the anchors. When I put anchors on a ship, it's the last thing I do on the ship before I complete that part of it. And I don't know why. I'm not sure why. It's something I don't enjoy to do. But I've always known, okay, I'm done with this. Oh, now I got to do the anchors. And I always, I have them penciled in there, and like I said, it's the last thing. Even I shade the entire hull and things like that. I save that for the very last thing, and I'm not sure why. I mean, it's such a small piece of the whole drawing, but it's still it's important to make it look like they should. The way the sun hits them, and their size, and how they're hanging on the hull or in their anchor pockets. So that's just, I guess, the weirdest thing, but that's the one thing I like the least.
Maybe all the curves or the
I don't know. I mean, because I lay that part out, and I always get that fairly good, and but I don't know why it's always been something that I just don't. I just don't enjoy that part of it. That's weird, but that's the only part of it I don't enjoy.
Wow, I would never have guessed that. I would have thought it would have been like doing each little tiny little rivet or every little tiny little loop of this,
No.
like
I know it sounds funny, but it's oddly enough not what I not the it's not that the only thing that I don't really enjoy is doing the anchors. I know it's for all the things that go into a drawing,
yeah,
for something that small to, you know, bug me, I don't know why. But it does. I don't know. I think because I'm always trying to make them look real, and I don't know if that's part of it. Like, I want to make them look as real as possible, and I don't know if that just I think maybe I'm overthinking it. I think I'm overthinking that part of it because, when you go back and you look at, the smokestacks or the lifeboats or the pilot house windows and things like that. The all of the different types of things that I put into that, and going to the anchor and just going, oh, but I think I just overthink that part. That's probably what I do. I need to chill.
yeah. I love anchors. I that was one of the first things when I was thinking up of a logo. I was like, "I gotta have an anchor. I need to," because I love anchors. I love maritime nautical looking stuff and anchors
Yeah.
per se.
Yeah. I guess.
That's awesome. That was such a fun process. That did you now you said you showed me earlier. Did you still want to show the one that you're currently working on right
Yeah.
now?
I've got a drawing of the Daniel J. Morel, ironically, from what I was just showing you. Um, and that, you will actually be able to, from that drawing you saw on the wall to this one, you'll be able to kind of be able to see what I'm talking about. So here it is right now. This is as far as it's gone.
Wow.
And as you can see, I worked on the aft section first.
Yep.
I got the cabins, smokestack, the smoke coming out of the funnel. So I come in a little bit closer and you can see that
Perfect.
where and I still have more to do on that area at the rigging and then getting the rest of that part of it finished and,
Oh
and
wow.
bringing the railing forward all the way to the pilot house, which I've started working on here. You can see that the windows of the pilot house, the detail in the mast, the radar antenna, the things that are above the pilot house. Um, but again, that comes from the research in the photographs that I look at and try to get that stuff in the proper positions. And if you can see see behind it too, you can see the clouds.
Is that a
You can
storm
see
too that you were
those
talking about back
storm
there?
clouds. Yeah, you can see those storm clouds that are back there.
Ah,
And that's something I love to set the ship against. So you can really get, a more of a dramatic scene.
yeah.
All the way to the horizon too. You can see those clouds, the bottoms of them and the storm. So you can see I guess you can see the evolution from that drawing on the wall to this one that I'm working on now. Um,
I mean, they're both
and
fantastic.
even the proportions of the when I'm looking at the boat are, to me, drastically better. Like my eye has even gotten better at seeing it. So that's that's a image of one in progress. And I have on my shelving over there, I have many different ones that are in, not just freighters either, but I have some ocean liners.
Mhm.
Um, I have also started doing a remastering process on some of my older prints. And what that means is it's a remark for those people that know what a remark is. It's a print that's hand altered by the artist to improve upon it, or change something around. And I've been looking back at some of my older drawings that are from maybe 2014, 15 on up, and decided that I want to update the water and the sky and even certain parts of the boat, like angles, things like that, that I've looked at and go, That's not quite right." And um, I've I've taken the image that I have in the computer that I stored from the original photographs I took of it. So that image, I'll take, and this is the only time that I use anything digital on my drawings. This is the only time, and it's actually not to add to it; it's to remove. So what I'll do is I will remove the water, make that back into a white space again. And even in the sky, I'll go back and that's the more difficult part because now I have, parts of the ship there that I have to be careful. I don't want to cover up. So I have to kind of layer it in. so I can still see where certain things are a mast or a smokestack. And so I'll take that and I'll take that image and save it. And then I print that. And then I draw on that like it's the original drawing again. So that print that I have on the board now is basically like a redo of what I had before. So I'll take and I'll look at the sky and I'll add new clouds in and change, what I had in the background. And then I'll look at the ship and I'll say, okay, I want to change the shadows here. I want to change the shading. I want to deepen something. I want to lighten things up here. And that's actually where I'll come back in with a white charcoal pencil, because, and I don't use charcoal any other time other than at this point, because in order to, I can't erase this at this point because it's ink. Now it's a print. So I'll take and I'll add um, highlights, or a certain part I'll shade differently, and then smooth it out with my blending stubs. But that allows me to add a light to it that I didn't have before. So once I'm happy with the ship, then I do the water just like an original. I'll go back in and I'll do the same process and completely recreate the water. And once I'm finished with that, same process again. Take it, photograph it, put it back in the computer. And at this point, because I have my camera set up to shoot in color, at that point, then I'll change it to black and white. I'll change it to grayscale. And now all that, like especially the charcoal, the white charcoal I've added, becomes like it was there originally. It looks like it was already there. So that print or that image is now what I use going forward to circulate the prints. So the image I had before no longer gets used. But I do save it as a historical archive record. I save it just so I can go back and look at it and maybe say, well, maybe I'll try this one again. I'll try something different on it. But I always save the original copy of it. But then going forward, all the new prints come off the remark. And I actually been taking these remarks to my shows and selling them as base. It's a half original drawing, like a mixed media. It's a print plus the work I've done by hand. And they've actually been, I think it's been taking a little bit, but they've started to sell. And I think people realize that, hey, maybe I can't afford an original, but I can afford something that he still worked on, and it's, the cost is a lot less. So, excuse me, I think that has helped people to see, hey, this is something that I can get that he really worked on. And it's been a fun process, and there's so many more too that I can do. I've even, I've done stuff that there's only a few years old and gone back and worked on. And just worked on a few right now of the Rice Coal Company, the steamships that they used to have. That, in fact, because I'm going to Sheboygan, Wisconsin this weekend, that was where the Rice Coal Company was headquartered, and the Rice family, a lot of them still live there. And so some of the ones I did, even 2019, we're not going back too many years. I redid those. I just redid the Rice brothers and the John P. Rice. So I'm going to take those along with me. At this point of the year, it's very difficult to draw originals because I don't have a lot of time between shows. So that allows me to get high quality work that's updated to the style I have now, and it's more or less a half original drawing. And it allows me to get work out there a little bit quicker. Yes, it's not the complete original. It's not the image out of my head, but it's also something that I liked, that I wanted to update to be able to sell again. Because sometimes, as years go by, the sales of some prints go away, especially with new drawings I introduce. But that allows me to get new work out there.